You're listening to Sound Side. I'm Libby Dankman. Hours before the United States launched strikes on Iran, there was another big story out of the Pentagon. The Department of Defense on Friday designated Anthropic, the U.S.-based AI company, a supply chain risk. It came shortly after President Trump ordered all federal agencies to stop using Anthropic technology. The announcement came as DoD and the AI company failed to reach a deal on how Anthropic technology could be used in classified networks. The company had a $200 million contract with the Pentagon, and its Claude AI model was reportedly used in the operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Out of the shambles of the Anthropic negotiation, the Pentagon quickly announced a deal with its rival, OpenAI. The contract dispute points to the increasing role of AI in the military and what safeguards may exist for its use, both domestically and at war. Bill Howe is an associate professor at the University of Washington's Information School, and he joins me now. Thanks very much for being here, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Reporting indicates that Anthropic and the Pentagon could not come to an agreement specifically on the use of AI and cloud technology in mass surveillance domestically, so of U.S. citizens, and this idea of using AI technology in autonomous weapons. Do you have any take on why this was something that they could not reach an agreement between Anthropic and DoD, and yet very rapidly OpenAI was able to swoop in and had that agreement? Like, what was it that Anthropic was resisting?
There's a distinction being drawn between the positions of these two companies, but honestly, I think that's a lot less of a distinction than it may seem, right? All of these companies held the position at one time or another, including OpenAI, that they were the lab to be trusted in managing this dangerous technology, and there was a bit of a regulatory capture strategy at play there. So Anthropic does deserve some credit, perhaps, for trying to hold the line on these particular two topics of mass surveillance and autonomous weapons. But, OpenAI had that position as well, so a few years ago, and as competition intensified and as the political environment shifted, they softened that position considerably. And so there's no real structural reason why Anthropic might not do the same in the future. So I don't know if I see it as a hard line. It's a competitive strategy to be seen as the company that's the one who's safe to operate this technology.
It's a branding.
It's a bit of a brand. I believe
ploy.
It's a bit of a branding ploy. They're somewhat listening to their employees, I think, and that is heartening to see the petition signed by employees of all these companies. And then a little bit of the PR value, positive or negative, is at play as well. But outsourcing our AI governance to these kinds of forces is not sustainable.
So I just want to read some New York Times reporting here, because they had sources inside of these negotiations, just so people can understand what apparently broke down here. This is from the New York Times. Emil Michael, who is the undersecretary at the Pentagon for Research and Engineering, used to be at Uber, was doing this negotiation with Anthropic, was on a call with Anthropic executives Friday afternoon. He said the Pentagon wanted Anthropic to allow for collection and analysis of unclassified commercial bulk data on Americans, such as geolocation and web browsing data. This is according to people briefed on the negotiations. Anthropic told the Pentagon that it was willing to let its technology be used by the NSA for classified material collection under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, so FISA. But the company wanted a legally binding promise from the Pentagon not to use its technology on unclassified commercial data. So more of like that broad sweeping surveillance versus having to go and get a judge to sign off on a FISA warrant. Is there anything that stands out to you about that dispute specifically?
I think we have companies trying to step in, as in some cases admirably, to fill in the gaps in the law. So, FISA leaves it a little bit ambiguous about what can and can't be done. It's intended to allow intelligence collection on foreign adversaries and in intelligence situations, but as legal scholars have noted, it sweeps in collection of data on Americans as well in all sorts of unregulated ways. And so I think Anthropic understands this gap and tried to fill in where the law does not. So that's admirable. But again, outsourcing this to the decisions of a few people at the heads of these companies with who are pressured by different incentives than the public interest is dangerous, to say the least.
So OpenAI inks the contract with the Department of Defense. They said in a blog post, the company said in a blog post, that it had similar guardrails to what Anthropic wanted, and you've touched on that a little bit. The analysis that I've read is that there were some differences in that Anthropic was basically saying, the product that we give you, we would set these technical limits where this surveillance could not be accomplished, basically like a hardwired type thing in their technology that they provide to the Pentagon. Whereas OpenAI was basically saying, we are going to rely on the Department of Defense to follow the law here, and that was a key difference. Do you think that that's an important difference? Do you buy that?
It's hard to think about it without the context of the current administration, right? So they've demonstrated time and again that they don't consider themselves to be subject to the rule of law, and so the idea that we'll leave it up to the DoD to follow the law, everyone knows what they're doing here, right? Everyone knows that this is that this is trying to avoid any responsibility from OpenAI and shift blame to the DoD, while we know that there's not going to be any operational rules there. So again, Anthropic tried to step up and say, well, let's at least try to have some kind of legally binding language that separates these two things, and OpenAI did not. So again, I think it all is a manifestation of the fact that we don't have any kind of coherent mechanism for AI governance at all, and so these kinds of situations are, in some sense, are inevitable.
At the same time, the Pentagon is saying, and Secretary Hegseth and the folks who are negotiating this deal, you can't have a company that we contract to provide a service deciding what we do, with it. We are the Department of Defense. Like, we know what the law is, and we know, what our strategy is, and we'll be compliant. But a private company making those decisions for us, like, that would never happen with Raytheon being consulted on how one of its, drones was used, for example. Like, is the fact that Anthropic wanted those limits overstepping, its role as a private company?
To some extent, this might be a better question for those who study the law. But, I do think there is a material difference between what's going on with AI as a technology and what's going on with, building planes and building other weapons. First of all, the speed at which those technologies have been developed in the past allowed for the law to kind of catch up. It was also in a very different context in terms of the current administration.
Basically, we know what a drone or a plane does, and AI is changing all the time.
That's right. And we collectively aren't always sure of the capabilities of these things. And so, there's a lot of market incentive to position these technologies as, ultra powerful and, magical, and the hype is very real. But the fact is that they make extremely strange, non-human errors with some regularity. And so there is a danger in deploying these simply because of the uncertainty and the scale with which they operate. And I don't think anyone would argue that the laws are currently designed to cover those cases.
So I want to ask about fully autonomous weapons. This is something that we have seen developing over the last decade. It was one of the reasons that the Pentagon and Anthropic reportedly couldn't get this deal done. What are fully autonomous weapons, and do we know, are they being deployed right now by the United States?
I don't think it's entirely clear. I would emphasize that as far as we know, and with pretty good evidence, the main use case of AI in national security context is not yet autonomous weapons. Certainly that's possible from what we see in going on in robotics and demonstrations that we see. The main use case really is in synthesizing analysis from massive, diverse data sources. So, satellite imagery and battlefield reports and collected intelligence and so on. Being able to make recommendations to human commanders in real time is not something that was ever possible before, and now it is. However, all of this is essentially unproven, right? We do see examples where these models can make wild, crazy mistakes that no human would ever make, and so there's a tendency that even if there is kind of a human in the loop to review the recommendation and make a decision, we see in business, there's going to be a tendency to kind of go into rubber stamping automated approval here. So there's a question: is there actually human deliberation going on about these recommendations, or is it slowly being offloaded onto the models themselves? So in that sense, the word autonomous is very real there, right? There's target prioritization and deployment decisions and so forth that are coming in, and perhaps have some chance for human to review them, but whether that's actually happening or not is not clear. I think what captures the attention in the public is more about the killer robot that is able to sort of operate on its own, and that kind of technology certainly is possible right now. It's not clear that that's being actively deployed as of today.
When you talk about the rubber stamping, obviously the stakes are very different, but I think about the ways that learning and writing and kind of crunching data is being offloaded to LLMs and different generative AI. And the question is, how much are humans actually deliberating, learning, making these decisions versus just, offloading it? But when you're talking about targeting systems or other types of extremely high stakes military operations, obviously the implications of that are much more concerning.
Right. So these models will produce some kind of an answer. And this is a well-known, essentially a failure mode of AI systems, is that they do tend to really want to provide some kind of an answer to your question, no matter what. They don't tend to say, I don't know, or the evidence is not clear, or we should really stop and slow down here. That's not something they've been trained to do. That's not something in the data. That's not something that we've even wanted them to do in many cases. And so that these answers are coming out with this kind of authoritative context of the computer said so, or occasional flashes of brilliance where it's like, oh wow, they really connected things across large data sets that would never have been possible for a human to do. You're faced with this decision at some point where this thing in front of me may actually have a better decision-making ability than I do. And so once you find yourself in that situation, what do you do? Is it more correct or ethical to stop and review it and go against it? Or is it more ethical to say, hey, even though I don't really understand exactly how or why this recommendation came through, I'm authorized and incentivized to trust it. And so I personally worry about those effects more than I worry about the actual press the button, go off and do whatever you want, go fight the war without any kind of oversight at all.
Yeah.
That's never going to be well, maybe not never, but that's not likely to soon be the advertised capability. All right, it's going to be something much slower and softer. But operationally, I don't know if there's a big difference between saying go off and do as thou wilt versus come in and check with me, but I'm not actually checking.
Yeah. Did you follow the Meta AI safety official saga from or employee? I don't know what her actual title was. Saga from last week where she had programmed AI to delete emails, but checked with her first. And then the AI agent basically just went and wiped her entire inbox. And if you didn't follow this, this is a thread we don't have to go down. But
I'm aware of it, but not much more. But honestly, yeah. These reports as they come out they happen a lot more often than we see reported. And so only the ones that kind of can capture some imagination, as that one did. A year or two ago, there was the agent that deleted the entire database and then sort of was apologizing effusively about, oh, I'm so sorry, you're right, I ignored your orders and so forth. But this was less impactful because it costs a customer some money or something like that, as opposed to this maybe more dramatic use cases. But the fact that
it would be like even people who are supposed to be steeped in this and helping to shape these agents, these AI tools, and it gets out of their control and in really problematic ways and terrifying ways, frankly, if you then apply that to what happens when we are using them more fully in the military.
Absolutely. And this is what I think about all the time, is that, it's easy to look at these superhuman capabilities in various ways and say, wow, this thing is really doing better than I could do with my team or myself. But it's not about the successes that I think are interesting. It's about when it fails in ways that the rest of our socio-technical systems are not equipped to gauge. I mean, even something like hallucinating citations in a legal brief, no lawyer would have the audacity to attempt to make up a case and put it in there. And so there's no check there. No, people aren't used to sort of checking every citation to make sure that they're valid and true. We just sort of assume that the consequences would be a deterrent to ever trying to do that. These systems don't have those consequences, don't understand those deterrents. They like the idea of that if that case would exist, boy, that would really help my argument. And so they'll happily sort of put that in there because they're essentially just predicting tokens that look good to humans. And so once you start turning these things over into being able to take action in the world, such as delete emails or delete a database, they're subject to the same sort of mistakes.
Making the argument that there's a credible enemy combatant in a certain location and maybe making up some of the data that is contributing to that assessment.
100%. There's no way to guarantee that that's not what's happening. It's not the same kind of deterministic rules-based really systems that we used to try to deploy, and frankly didn't work that well. These things do work well in certain contexts, but we're now at sea about what kind of mistakes can and do happen. And the reports come in, just like you said last week, and they'll continue to come in because these systems fundamentally can't provide those kinds of guarantees.
Bill Howe is an associate professor at the University of Washington's Information School. He runs UW's Responsibility in AI Systems and Experiences Center. Is there anything we haven't touched on, Bill, that you think people should keep in mind about this?
I've mentioned this need for some sensible AI governance before, and I'll say what a lot of folks have said as well, that some sort of independent body consisting of researchers across computer science, information science, law, political science, economics, needs to be established to sort of debate these decisions and inform the policy. That's unfortunately unlikely to happen under the current administration, but that's something that I'll continue to recommend to folks.
Bill Howe at UW, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.